Hey, hey, hey. It's Filter Free Friday, y'all. Listen, I'm so glad y'all here. I was on a More Squared event earlier this week and on the education committee and learned that the request in the Kansas City Public Schools to not suspend children in pre K, that would be 4 year olds, to fifth grade, that would be 10 and 11-year olds, is going very well. And so I just am excited about that because we know that if we suspend children, that correlates to the school to prison pipeline. And if you don't follow economist Lance Lochner or any of his work, I think you should because it's important to know that for um, every person that we can get to graduate, it really does have a beautiful boost to the economy and improves our cities. You know, I one of the worst things I feel like I've ever done was one time when I was in church. My son, and gosh, he was a toddler. I don't remember how old he was exactly, but he was just cutting up, honey. And regardless of what he was doing, I was going through an incredible amount of stress, and I spanked him. And in that moment, it was almost like I couldn't even control the fact that I was spanking him, like, it was like my own stuff was just taking over, and it's something that I've apologized to him, even, as recently as in the last, year or so, because sometimes when we lash out at other people, it has absolutely nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with us. And when I wrote The Wholly Educated MFer in 2020, for those of you who don't remember, we were in the middle of a global pandemic. I was trying to give work away to people, and folks were just trying to figure out how to lead in this drastically ambiguous environment. And they couldn't figure it out. And so I had all this time on my hands, and I wrote this, what I think is a beautiful book about some of the things that I was most embarrassed by. In fact, the person who wrote the foreword, Jim Nunley, when we first met, one of the things he said to me was, "What are you hiding?" And I remember kind of being like, "What? Like, what are you talking about?" He was like, "There's this incongruence between how you show up and what I know about you. So what are you hiding?" And I remember thinking, I'm not hiding anything. And last year, when I got my new therapist, and if you need therapy, y'all need to get it. When I got my new therapist last year, he one of the things he said to me was, "You're actually not very vulnerable, Nicole. You are candid, you are blunt, but you are not vulnerable." And I remember sitting back in my chair going, "Dang, he done called me out." But there's a part in this book that I want to read to you, and I got a reason. Like, I don't even want to position it like I don't have a reason for this. I really want to sell the remaining copies of the Wholly Educated MFR that I have in inventory, and but I have taken them off of my personal brand site because I'm launching this empathy revolution, and so many people have issue with the word. And I describe that I did not name myself the Wholly Educated MFer. In fact, people just called me that when they were trying to be disparaging. But one of the reasons why I accepted the term was because God said, you know, Nicole, you are a wholly educated MFer. But the MFer section, if you will just be patient with me for a moment, is let me just read a little bit. It said, a person or thing of a specified kind, especially one that is a formidable, remarkable, or impressive person in some way. And I said, MFer, question mark. I had a really hard time with the term. My biggest issue was the literal term, person who has had sex with their mother. I mean, how traumatic. Traumatic, but a real occurrence for many of my ancestors who withstood the abominations associated with legalized institutional slavery across the globe. A larger problem related to term use is that we don't bother ourselves with understanding the historical significance of the words we use. Many people are unaware of the true horrors of chattel slavery here in the United States of America and its connection to words like MFer. During that time, if Black men were deemed to be bucks, they were employed to have sex with with innumerable women, some they knew and some they did not, in order to produce more property. It is highly possible that men were forcibly required to have sex with their own sisters, daughters, cousins, aunts, and yes, even their mothers. And then I kind of fast forward and say, yeah, and then there's an incongruence between using the term like MFer and the wholly educated parts of me. So, I mean, I still think that this is one of the best things I've ever written. And when words are harmful to people, we have to ask ourselves, why do we intend to continue to use them? There are people who love the title of this book and they would not ever, they would, I mean, they just cannot understand why people are not into it. And then there are other people for whom they love the book, but the title prevents them from being able to say that they love the book publicly. And that just happened. A pastor I love and respect just told me that he and his wife just finished reading it. They thought it was an amazing piece of work, but basically can't even suggest it, couldn't even post the book because of the words. And that takes me to some of the words that we tend to use around when we're talking about racial pejoratives like the N word or LGBT slurs like the F word, or when someone has a special need, and some of us are still using the R word. I know teachers who will still use the R word. And I like to bring up the things that I get wrong, so that people feel comfortable talking about the areas and the places where they need to do better. And so that brings me to what I wanted to share with you today around being one of or having to experience some of the worst things you've ever done. And so there was, I don't know if you've heard about this uh, studio owner who is in um, San Francisco, who just used a water hose to hose down some homeless people. But we're going to take about 30 seconds and watch it together, and then I'll come back.
Despite the threats and constant phone calls for interviews, he's not apologizing yet.
I find it hard to apologize when we've had no help on this situation.
As for Edson, he makes this call to those in the community.
You want to repeat people respect you, you have to respect the people. Huh?
In San Francisco, Dion Lim, ABC 7 News.
And this incident happened outside Barbarossa Lounge next to the art gallery. A partner there says they want to make clear.
So what I think is interesting is that you had this gallery owner who took his water hose and actually hosed down a person. And I was having a hard time thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about today, because what I didn't want people to do was to hone in on who this guy is and what this guy has done and over focus on it. But can you imagine? I don't know what his situation is like, having people without homes being outside of his business every day and sitting on the sidewalk. But what kind of trauma would happen to you if you can stand leaning against a fence and spray water on a human being and do that without any remorse? When asked about it later, so when I think about what happened with my son in church, when asked about it later, the empathy is empathy for myself is saying, listen, I got this thing wrong and I am sorry. Instead of doubling down on it. And then empathy for my child is to apologize to him, to make amends, and to insist on doing better going forward. The blood is not, in the amygdala, the back part of the brain where you are not thinking. You've had weeks, days at least to think about this, and you're still like, I got problems apologizing for spraying down an old woman with water. And I just wonder sometimes what has happened to us. If you struggle, though, with showing empathy to people who are homeless, I invite you to read or listen to Same Kind of Different as Me. This is a modern day slave, an international art dealer, and the unlikely woman who bound them together. That's what this book is about. They wrote another book together called Working Our Way Home, which I tend to think is better. But if you struggle, this is a real story, to understand how someone could end up being homeless, how someone might not be able to get gainfully employed. I invite you to maybe read or listen or spend some time in a homeless camp to get a better understanding, because that separation that allows us to not know about a thing but have really strong opinions about a thing is going to can prevent us from being empathetic. And then the other thing that I made it a little harder for me to think about what I was going to talk about today, and y'all let me know, if you have a differing opinion, but the 6-year-old who went to school and shot his teacher, I could tell that the officer who was reporting on that story struggled to call the 6-year-old a baby and a child. But I want you to think about yourself as a 6-year-old. This idea of somebody dying and being gone forever, the fact that someone can convince you to believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and things like that is a good testament that children don't work really well in the abstract. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is our responsibility as the adults? Because I would argue that we shouldn't have handcuffs small enough for a 6-year-old. So when I see, in this country, we like to say that the South is so awful, but it's in California where I saw a 5-year-old handcuffed. It's California, Los Angeles. It is in California where this man sprayed down a woman who was homeless. And so we don't, to separate ourselves by states and suggest that there's, certain states that have a higher moral compass than others. I don't know about that. But if a 6-year-old is saying, hey, I like the people here because they're reading me books, and this is not the first time this happened. I don't know if you remember, it kind of happened in the early 2000s too. And the prosecutor is sitting across the table from a 6-year-old. We don't have jails for 6-year-olds. And so what's our responsibility to do something about our fascination with guns, our inability to make sure that we are responsible in how we house them, our decisions to think that either you have empathy or you don't, and I'm not going to do the work to try to increase my level of empathy. So for today, here's what my ask is for you. I want you to think about the worst thing you've ever done. And I want you to imagine that it was captured on video, like this art dealer who's spraying down this woman, or how we were all, able to later characterize George Santos as an absolute liar, or, and we have not been caught in our lies, or how we can, how do we treat homeless people when we walk past them? And if somebody got that on video, what would it be like? Where's your weapon? If you have one, is it possible for someone to get it? All I know is this: had it been recorded when I had my breakdown in church that day, I'm not so sure I would ever be able to run anybody's business. It was a low point. And I'm not trying to make false equivalencies. When we do things, there should be consequences. And empathy is recognizing that you have done some of the worst things ever. And from that place of embarrassment or shame or guilt or whatever it is you have, I know that when I wrote these stories and the Holy Educated MFer and Jim was asking me, what was I hiding? I noticed that there were some things that I was shameful of, and actually putting them on paper helped me to release that shame. But it has also opened up my heart to other people who get caught in the middle of the worst thing they've ever done. And so how can we look at people more wholly and humanely is my question. And from that position of wholeness and humanity, I just wonder how we might be able to be empathy engineers ourselves. It doesn't get rid of the consequences. The consequences remain. But you tell me. I don't know. I'm just a singular person that thinks that it's a great idea if we can build a little more empathy in the world. And I don't know if I'm right or wrong about that, but I really do hope you join me. It's Filter Free Friday, y'all. We got plenty work to do.